You want to see the most beautiful thing I've ever filmed?
Now, people who know me know I'm a big fan of survival horror, particularly those lesser known indie titles which look like asset flips and in most cases usually are. And if the view counts are any indicator, everyone likes seeing me talk about those games too. The problem is that with a lot of those kind of games, there's really not that much to talk about, since most of them are usually stuck in early access limbo. But even then, like the ones that are actually finished don't have enough meat on their bones to make up an entire video anyway. So what I've done, instead of focusing on just one of them here, is focus on 3. Yeah, instead of a video covering just one subpar survival horror game, you're getting a trilogy. Lucky you. And I thought, seeing as there's bugger else going on at the moment, and it is the right month for it, like, what else am I going to cover? Right, so let's kick things off with a bang here, with the first game in the list named Wolfmate. Now, this was actually made by the same dev who made both Ruin Nurse and Crawling Lab, that are 2 games you might remember I did a video on a while back. Either way though, this is another supposed survival horror game according to the Steam tags, but then again, it's also listed as a 3D platformer. And about the only platforming I can see in the game are the physics of that main antagonist's giant calcium tanks.
This is beautiful.
Anyway, the premise is you're playing as an unnamed student just transferred to this school, who's apparently also a gifted dog trainer, because that's something a teacher's totally going to mention when they're introducing someone to the class. This bloke's seated next to a girl named Freya, who instantly starts acting weird, even sniffing him, which instantly catches the attention of another girl in the class. Frustratingly too, much like this developer's other games, there's no voice acting of any kind in any of these cutscenes, which just makes them even more bizarre to watch. After this though, we see that it's now nighttime, and for some reason your character's still stuck at the school, only to then run into Freya in the corridors, who's now acting even weirder. It turns out she's some kind of wolf girl and is infatuated with the player because of his scent.
Am I right?
Yeah.
Am I right? Am I right, Lord?
So?
This quickly throws you right into the action, where you're now stuck in the school after hours and have to find your way out, with this idle music that sounds a hell of a lot like the soundtrack from Suspiria. Plus, it's also hard to not compare this thing to Psycho no Sotoka, with it being a very familiar setting and premise. Set in the same looking Japanese school that I swear I've seen in a dozen of these kinds of titles, where what you're again trying to do is avoid an NPC that's constantly patrolling the area, trying to reduce the noise you make and stay hidden while you complete your objectives, because if they see you, your only option is to simply run away. Shit! Fuck! Only this time when you're captured, you instead seem to be getting overwhelmed with affection rather than having your torso overwhelmed with stab wounds. Plus here with Dogmate, it doesn't look like you're seeing this entire world through a bottle of Windex. Now at first, getting out of the school seems pretty simple. In fact, all you gotta do is find the combination for the cabinet where the exit key is kept, and then off you go. It's a piece of piss. This requires searching the nearby classrooms for clues, but it's all very straightforward, and you get these icons on the screen to even show you where each of them are. Then once you beat it though, you soon realise that this is only the first of many playthroughs. Because in actuality, you've got to beat this thing 20 different times, with there being entirely new objectives for every single run. The first time, for instance, you've only got to find those keys to get to the exit, but then on the second run, you now need to find a bunch of components to fix a ladder, so you can climb out of the second story window. All of which still ends up with you just getting caught by Freya, along with your character T-posing on the grass.
You lucky bastard.
And can someone explain to me exactly how this is supposed to be a bad thing?
They must think the sun shines out your ass.
Another earlier level has you finding a bunch of chemicals to make a formula in the chemistry lab that is supposed to knock Freya out, only it instead ends up turning her into a giant Tess. Again, something I'm struggling to see as a bad outcome. I mean, did Lady D teach us nothing about what men really think about humongous women?
You ungrateful, selfish wretch.
More than that though, with each level, there's new buffs given to Freya as well to make her more challenging, but then it's also balanced out by giving the player similar upgrades too. For instance, early on, about all you can do is run around and try to not be seen, but you'll soon be able to unlock the ability to crouch walk, so your footsteps are harder to hear, along with being able to hide in lockers like it's alien isolation. To counter that, Freya soon gets the ability to sniff you out of these things. And then to counter that, the player has the ability to bash out of lockers to temporarily stun her. Later in the game, she gets the ability to go into a rampage mode, flying around the place at a faster speed, and even then eavesdrop, where she's able to listen in for any sound you make, regardless of where you are on the map. Which really makes me think that the dev played Rainbow Six Siege, because this is almost identical to Lion's mechanic in that game.
Enemy drone incoming, starting the clock.
You don't get any kind of weapons either, which kind of sucks, but then again does make sense when you consider that it's not that likely to find a flamethrower or a shotgun lying around a school. In lieu of that though, you do get a dog whistle, which makes her heal for a few seconds, along with eventually a GPS, which shows her position on the screen. And if all of this is sounding tiring, there's even a so-called low stress mode, which shows her position on the screen at all times. You know, for the time-poor gamer who doesn't have all day to hide in lockers trying to avoid being captured by the giant wolf girl. The only real problem with all of this is that despite where you're up to, every single level really just boils down to doing the same few actions over and over. Like for one of them you might need to find a dog whistle which is being kept in a locked cabinet. And it's just that same mechanic of exploring the school to collect the items to unlock it, while dodging Freya the entire time. Fuck off, bitch! It's always just about finding a bunch of items, most of which are under lock and key, before then bringing them all back to a certain spot and finishing the stage. Or to then unlock either a buff for Freya or a new mechanic for the player, like being able to lean around corners, which to be honest should have been in the game from the beginning. Because she's getting smarter the more you play, the less chances you get to take as well, then like Alien Isolation, you can't really run around either, because she's gonna hear your footsteps and even pick up on your scent, which results in lots of replays for some of these levels, seeing as there's no checkpoints or any of that kind of stuff either. Nothing else though, like some of these scenarios are pretty funny. One level has you building a cardboard box in what's a very clear homage to Metal Gear Solid. There's another one where you're collecting pieces of rope to build a trap, which kind of seems to work at first, but then quickly turns into Tarantino's wet dream. One of the weirdest ones is where you collect all these items from around the school to summon in a so-called toilet ghost, which then just turns out to be completely fucking useless. Because instead of this thing helping you, it instead just passes on to the afterlife. It's like, yeah, thanks, idiot. So it often does kind of seem like these are designed more around the funny endings more than the gameplay structure itself. For instance, another one, you've got to try to distract Freya by setting up a barbecue in that main courtyard, only for the player to then change his mind and stay after he sees how crap she is at cooking steak. And yeah, I get it, it's that instinctual cringe that every man gets when he sees someone messing up a perfectly good piece of meat. And again though, like, I've got to ask, like, how is this supposed to be a bad outcome? Once you beat all 20 levels, you get the final ending, which just shows the two of them walking off into the rain, arm in arm. Plus you unlock the infinite mode where you can replay any of the levels, but now controlling which of the couple dozen mechanics are turned on or off. Along with playing it through in a randomizer mode, which kinda sounds neat on paper, but is more often than not insanely unfair. Because now you're entirely at the mercy of whether or not this is going to disable critical features. Like even something basic like being able to see where your objective items are, which is just asinine. And I don't know about you, but I don't really want to be running around an entire school trying to find the needles in a haystack over and over. I mean, it's hard enough to find these things and get to them when you know where they are, let alone when that basic information is kept from you. You also don't know if this mode is disabling other crucial mechanics like being able to hide in lockers, and I just can't see the point of playing through this unless you want to keep retrying it over and over, until you at least get a fair batch of randomizers. And even then, all you're really earning from this is to unlock a few more cosmetic items in this store, most of which aren't even that good anyway. So overall, Wolfmate ain't a bad game, but it is definitely rating up pretty high there on my weird shit-o-meter when it comes to these indie titles. But what's up next is arguably even more bizarre, and that's Lunar Eclipse, developed by Black Rabbit's Tales. Now in this one, you're playing as a young blonde woman named Elish, waking up in what looks like Darth Vader's Bacta tank to find herself in a seemingly abandoned laboratory. introduced to us through this dialogue, which looks like something out of a visual novel and with what's very clearly AI art. Having to then find a way out of this combination locked room wearing nothing but a towel to cover herself up. After a minute or so, I figure out the combo to the lock has got obviously something to do with this constellation thing on the ceiling. And after that, I soon find my way out, only to then run into another locked door. Heading into a nearby room, I get some of the first lore in the game as well, finding out that Elish's tank is actually an incubator that she's been kept in for the better part of 4 years. Which then kicks off this whole recurring theme they got going on here where she keeps making remarks about how much her body has physically changed, in particular in regard to her butt and boobs.
What in the fuck?
Which starts to get even weirder after this when we get a few more details about what her actual age might be. And one of the things I noticed after picking up all these diary entries is that her age is listed as 9, which means she's essentially a 13-year-old. However, keep in mind she's been kept in stasis essentially in that incubator the entire time, which has caused her body to grow at a more rapid rate, giving her the physical maturity of someone who looks like they're in their late teens or early 20s, but then keeping the mental capacity of a child.
What in the actual fuck?
In fact, one of the side mechanics in the game is going around and collecting all of her missing toys. Not to mention the healing items are candy bars and band-aids.
Man, somebody call the police. We need to report this.
And look, man, like there's nothing wrong with survival horror games where you play as a vulnerable female. In fact, some of the best titles in the genre lean heavily into that concept. Things like Silent Hill 3 and the Clock Tower series being a great example. Only, you didn't have Heather Mason running around the entire time talking about how big her boobs and butt were. Not to mention, Alyssa Hamilton didn't spend the opening minutes of the Clock Tower 3 wearing nothing but a bath towel. And they certainly didn't have nudity options there either.
Who would even think of doing something so disgusting?
Anyway, I eventually find the code to get past that second locked door, and then soon after that I come across Elish's bedroom, along with finding yet again another locked door, this time to the security room. Also coming across a much larger room full of zombies, which I can't even enter without my gear. I do find the keycard to the security room though, and then get the power back on through a puzzle that feels like something ripped out of a Resident Evil game. Before then finally getting into Elish's bedroom, which, yeah, looks exactly like the kind of room that a 9-year-old girl would have. Yeah, and I love all these posters up on the wall, which again, are very clearly using AI art. At this point I need to find 3 cylinders to open a box, which has the key to the wardrobe. But to do that, I need to study some nearby clues and then backtrack to previous rooms to find where these are hidden. One of which is kept behind, you guessed it, another fucking combination lock. Followed by one little puzzle here where you got to rotate the cylinders in that box before it finally unlocks. Finally though, our girl's got on some decent clothing. Well, I don't know, decent in the sense of not being a bath towel. And after grabbing a knife that was tucked under the pillow because, yeah, that's safe, I can head back into that room full of zombies and proceed onward. Which then highlights the absolutely dreadful melee combat system where it feels like you're swinging around a giant concrete pole. Now, in actuality, it's an incredibly basic combat system. You just move up to something and then mash the attack button to pull off a 4-hit combo. Only with the knockback from each hit, enemies are often going to be out of range for that 3rd or 4th strike. And the delay between animations before being able to dodge is so long that it is really quite hard to not take a hit at times. I mean, you might be thinking that I'm making it look harder than it is here, but trust me, I'm not. It sucks. It's like the polar opposite of a game like Silent Hill F, where instead of being able to dodge around with superhuman reflexes, you're instead moving slower than at 56k modem's dial-up speed. There's also a bit of a basic stealth system here where you can crawl around and sneak up behind enemies, but this is kind of useless because once you get up to them, you've still got to attack them regardless. Anyway, moving on, after clearing this first room out, I try the elevator, only to discover that the power's out, which leads me down to the basement. Which I will admit is kinda creepy at first. I mean, if nothing else, there is something universally unsettling about pitch black thin corridors, with the sights of zombies lurking off in the distance. Soon though, we get the power back on and all of that tension is lost, like tears in rain. Then we're back to just stabbing zombies slowly with a kitchen knife over and over. Also coming across a bunch of crafting items, leading into one of the other main mechanics where you can craft bits of clothing, assuming you've got the recipe. There's even another save room down here along with a fuse puzzle we need to solve. Yeah, fuse puzzles. Classic. Oh yeah, and speaking of puzzles, this room off to the side here has the most ambiguous one I've seen yet. Where, as I later found out, the solution is you need to add the two numbers together on the first two rows, but then subtract the numbers from the other two. And how I'm supposed to know that, I've got no idea. Either way though, this gets me into another storage room where I can find a fuse, and can then move on through this locked gate where things get even more complex, which really is the kind of stuff I enjoy the most. And to get through this next bit, you need to juggle items around in your inventory and create different paths. And it's just like so many horror games these days have just basic fetch quests in lieu of actual puzzles. Like all you gotta do is go somewhere, find an item, and then bring it back. But even something simple like this, requiring little more than basic logic and problem solving to create different routes, just ends up being far more interesting. Then the final obstacle in the basement, once you get through that locked door, is yet again another combination of levers to flip. Powering up that elevator on the main floor, where I'm then told that that's all the current content this version has. And then the only thing left to do at this point is to grind respawning zombies in the basement to get more crafting components, assuming I really want to waste my time making all those outfits. But I mean, to do that, like, I'd really have to be some kind of fucking loser.
Man, you are one pathetic loser.
I will say though, overall, this thing ain't that bad. For starters, it at least holds a pretty steady frame rate. I mean, look at that, 144 FPS, like, that's better than Borderlands 4. It's just that I feel like I'm playing as a geriatric woman every time I try to swing a weapon around. And for something so fundamental to feel so bad, like, that's a pretty damn big dilemma. The stamina system is also a terrible idea, and look, I don't mind stamina draining from melee attacks in games like this, because it at least makes sense that you'd get puffed out from that kind of physical action. I mean, yeah, dog, if you put everything you had into attacking some horrible zombie over and over, you'd eventually get winded and need to catch your breath. Plus, off the back of that, I think that your stamina draining from having to dodge is also fine and makes sense for the same reason. Having your stamina drain though from just lightly jogging around is absolutely stupid, because it means when you're just simply navigating the area, you've got to keep stopping every 10 seconds to catch your breath, creating just needless downtime. Killing Antidote is guilty of the same shit. Another game which also has a bit of a fondness for letting the player dress up a female character in a bunch of different outfits. But then again, like, you know what, given that this thing's still really in its early stages, I would be shocked if the dev didn't improve all this stuff later down the line. So I will be curious to see how it's all handled, along with how the actual age of the protagonist is handled as well, because, yeah man, that's a spicy meatball.
That's a spicy meatball!
Which finally brings me on to the last game in the list, with Despair Blood Curse, developed by Crimson Sequence, known for such titles as Despair Blood Curse. If nothing else though, this is an actual game, taking a couple of hours to get through, which has a solid premise that it doesn't waste time setting up. The gist is you're playing as a woman named Anna, returning to her family home after the death of her mother and the disappearance of her sister. Yeah, it turns out they took in a guest called Lillian, and then after that, everything went to shit. Right off the bat, you got to the hallmarks here, a classic survival horror with a creepy mansion at night time as the backdrop. Heading into this nearby room at the start, there's all these weird looking busts and a bunch of statues that are absolutely going to come to life later on and attack me. Before I soon come across the first puzzle being an electrified bathtub, which I obviously need to turn off at some point. Then around the corner, I find the first save spot, which in typical survival horror fashion has limited uses, as well as a lantern to help me see in the dark, which gets put to use almost instantly as I cut the power, making this side of the building darker than a coal miner's asshole. Also then first encountering some of the enemies and able to use Anna's axe gun, which is a pretty solid little weapon, combining all of the objective benefits of a gun with the other objective benefits of an axe. And reminding me that we don't get enough weapons in video games that combine the benefits of ranged and melee attacks in a single package. Plus I also appreciate the gore that's on offer here, how I can literally blow someone's head clean off. Anyway, about this point is when I run out of inventory space and I need to start shuffling things around in an item box so I can just pick up the second weapon, the shotgun. Which might sound about as impactful as hitting someone with a wet sock, but it at least seems to do pretty decent damage. This all then leads me down to the basement where I get the first of many mini-boss encounters against whatever the fuck this thing is supposed to be. And after sending this thing off to asset flip hell and replacing a nearby fuse, I take the elevator down to the sewer, but I can't actually get in there because I've somehow missed the key. Which then sent me off on this 15-minute long slog where I backtracked through every single room to try to find what I'd missed, eventually finding a panel in that second room to lower the nearby statue. Yeah, immediately aggroing these nearby enemies that I totally didn't say earlier would come back to life to attack me. Which also ended up stun locking me and dishing out my first death. After retrying this sequence and keeping my sweet distance, I can take them out without too much of a fuss. Then finding this gold sphere, which I apparently have to mix with acid, which reveals a key hidden inside it. Okay. And then after that, hi-ho, it's off to the sewers we go. Which, if nothing else, is again a classic survival horror backdrop, where there's a whole bunch more enemies to deal with too. And along with that, as I'm moving around down here, I get a pretty good jump scare as well when I turned a corner and saw one of these huge monsters just standing there like an asshole.
Oh my god!
Eventually, I come across some kind of gnarly looking ancient demonic temple where a key to the catacombs is sitting on a podium, with a suspiciously detailed statue of a demon hovering nearby. And yeah, again a statue which I'm totally sure is not going to come to life as soon as I grab the item. And oh, look at that, it's alive. Thankfully though, basic navigation ain't this guy's strong suit, so yeah, I put him down pretty easily. Bitch. Before I then make my way down to the catacombs, which, as far as catacombs go, is surprisingly well lit. As well as finding a semi-automatic pistol, really making me wonder what time period this game's supposed to be set in. I mean, the main character looks like she's a 16th century huntress or something, but then I'm finding pistols and there's all these very modern looking machines and generators lying around. Plus, this whole area looks like one of the dungeons you'd see in the Elder Scrolls Oblivion, with these narrow passageways allowing for some asshole puckering ambushes. With the goal that seems to be finding a series of components to fire a cannon in the main atrium area to destroy the wall. And I do want to say as well how I really appreciate how this game makes items of interest glow brightly so you can see these things from a distance. At this point I'm introduced to these new enemies with these robed cultists who look like they got lost after wandering a bit too far from Salazar's castle. But hey man, like I'll take these guys over those walking prolapsed anuses any day of the week. Un forastero! And after finding a prison key and making my way downtown, walking fast, faces past and I'm homebound, I get ambushed by a bazillion enemies at once. Soon finding a wheel, which I can then use to turn off some traps I had to avoid earlier, along with having to kill like a dozen more enemies. Which ends with me finding the final component for the cannon, letting me combine all of these ingredients together. Also finally getting to use this pack of matches to set the cannon off, which I've had in my inventory for the better part of the last hour. After blowing a hole to that nearby wall, I find a heap of ammo and healing items, which in video game language basically tells you that a boss fight's coming up. You know, if this ominous descent into literal hell wasn't obvious enough. And yeah, sure enough, after finding the library key, there's this humongous demon thing which shows up, looking like it's comprised entirely of body parts. One which yet again suffers from the basic inability to move at a faster pace than what I'd call a brisk walk, which means it goes down easier than key lime pie. Then leaving me with the very tedious task of having to backtrack all the way back up to the prison, the catacombs and the sewers to get back to the mansion. And kind of reminded me a whole lot of the structure in Resident Evil 1 where you had to go back to the mansion after clearing out the guardhouse. And yeah, I'm sure that was the developer's intention. Either way though, we're now back in the mansion, rummaging around in the library and looking for more items. Also giving me another fucking heart attack as I ran into this room and Andre the Giant was just instantly there to grab me. After stuffing around for a bit here, I find the accursed key, which opens the final door all the way back at the ass crack end of the catacombs. Yeah, yippee. Also, there's a bunch more cultists that have now spawned in, and a few more monsters, but I just ended up skipping these to try to save time. Followed by another descent into an underground temple-looking thing, where the game's even nice enough to give me a save point and an item box, which yet again tells you that a boss fight is about to happen. And just as I come across Anna's sister, I'm attacked by some creepy-looking lady with gargoyle wings. But all I can do here is just haul ass in between turning around and getting off a couple of shots. And after eating up almost all of my ammo, this bitch finally buys the farm. All for the story to come to an end as Anna's sister wakes up as a vampire and instantly bites her on the neck. Yeah, really putting the curse in blood curse. You get it?
Shut up!
Now overall, while this one definitely has that whole asset flip stank to it and some questionable content, I can't deny that it at least feels and plays like an actual game. You know what I mean? One that you can play from start to finish in a cohesive manner. I mean, there's a combat system, there's mechanics like item boxes and limited saves. You got items to combine and a tangible journey through a world that feels well put together. Plus there's a story with a premise, a build up and a payoff. There's even a new game plus mode with you getting a more powerful pistol after beating it for the first time. And about all it's missing is the option to dress up the main character in a short skirt and a G-string. So you know what, in all honesty, I ain't got much of an issue with this spare blood curse. And at least I don't get chased by a half girl, half wolf creature the entire time that presumably wants to breed with me to create the most horrific looking children ever. Either way though, that's it man, that's the end of the video. And I do want to say that every game I talked about here was something suggested by someone in my comments. And if you guys didn't tell me about these games to begin with, then I wouldn't even be able to make these kind of videos. So if there's another wacky horror game, or 2 or 3 out there that looks like something that'll be right up my alley, well, be sure to drop a comment below and let me know. Otherwise, thanks for watching.